The late afternoon sun, a weak winter orange, sliced through the ornate glass of the study window, illuminating motes of dust dancing above my old mahogany desk. I was surrounded by the ghosts of my career, ancient maps, bound volumes of forgotten histories, and a familiar, comforting scent of aged paper and lemon oil. I, Elias Vance, retired professor of ancient history, was not grading essays but reannotating my first major publication, a monograph on late Roman administration. It was a pointless, nostalgic exercise, a way to keep my mind sharp, a subtle protest against the creeping numbness that had settled since my nephew, Marcus, and his fiancée, Valerie, had moved in 8 months ago. Marcus, my sister's boy, was ostensibly here to manage my affairs following my minor health scare, but their presence was less a comfort and more a polite, perpetual surveillance. They moved through the house with the cold efficiency of caretakers waiting for a will to be read. We exchanged strained pleasantries, mostly about my diet or my supposed need for rest. No warmth, just a low-burning sense of trespass. Today, however, I was to escape. I was leaving for the annual Cryptography Historical Society meeting in Chicago. My train ticket was tucked securely into the inner pocket of my tweed jacket. I heard the front door click shut downstairs, then the faint, quick footsteps of Valerie coming up. She paused in the doorway, framed by the shadow. "Professor Vance," she chirped, the artificial sweetness of her voice grating like sand on glass. "The taxi is here. Do you have your phone and prescription? Marcus sends his love. He was sorry to miss your send-off." I replaced my reading glasses slowly, an old habit that bought me a necessary second of composure. "Everything is in order, Valerie. Tell Marcus I'll be back Tuesday." Her eyes flickered away from mine, settling briefly on an unassuming stone bookend carved with the head of Hadrian. It was an insignificant detail, but the momentary shift in her gaze didn't escape me. I took my leather satchel and descended the stairs, leaving the silence of the study behind. The train, the Midwestern Express, was a relic of a more elegant age. Settling into my sleeper car, I felt the satisfying rumble beneath me, the rhythm of escape. I was not just going to a conference. I was moving the Codex Argentum, a priceless Roman artifact I'd secretly discovered and was meticulously verifying, to a secure location, away from the prying eyes of Marcus and Valerie, who I now suspected were after more than just my pension. An hour out of the city, the dining car was sparsely populated. I was sipping tepid tea when a young woman, perhaps a student, slid into the booth opposite me. She didn't look up, instead fumbling with a crumpled napkin. "Professor Vance?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of the tracks. "Pretend you're sick. Get off at the next unscheduled stop. Don't ask why. Your research is compromised, Professor." They're waiting. Before I could process the shock or question her, she was gone, leaving the crumpled napkin behind. I watched her hurry back toward the observation car, a fleeting shadow in a gray woolen coat. My heart hammered against my ribs. I unfolded the napkin. It wasn't a warning scrawled in simple English. Etched faintly into the paper was a single, tiny, perfectly rendered character, a symbol from the obscure Hadrian cipher, a code I was the only living scholar who knew was the key to unlocking the true translation of the Codex Argentum. The train slowed, the wheels shrieking in protest. We were in the middle of nowhere, and the only sign was a rusted water tower. An announcement blared, "Unscheduled brief maintenance stop." Passengers remained seated. I stood up, pretending a sudden dizzy spell. I stumbled toward the door, clutching the napkin, the image of Valerie's glance at the Hadrian bookend suddenly searing into my mind. I barely made it onto the deserted platform before the train lurched forward, leaving me alone with the vast, silent plains. The air was frigid. Was the threat real, or was my mind failing? And how did that student know the cipher? The wind was a raw, howling thing in that forgotten station, smelling of iron and dried prairie grass. I found a lone payphone, a true relic, and called an expensive emergency cab service, giving them the coordinates of the water tower. The student, Lena, or whoever she was, had bought me time, but time was a fleeting commodity. The fact that the threat had moved from my home to my professional life, confirmed by the Hadrian cipher, meant the conspiracy was deeper and more organized than I'd imagined. By morning, I was back in the city, dropped off 3 blocks from my house. I approached my home like a thief, slipping in the back way before Marcus or Valerie were likely awake. I invented a believable lie. The conference was abruptly postponed due to a travel strike. It would hold them for a few hours. My study was exactly as I had left it, yet subtly wrong. The scent of lemon polish was faint, masked by a ghost of expensive, sweet perfume, Valerie's. My focus immediately went to the desk drawer where I kept my old teaching journals. I hadn't locked it. I rarely did. Now it was closed, but when I ran my finger over the front, the faintest hairline scratch was visible on the lacquer near the pull knob, too clean to be old. Someone had recently picked the lock. I moved to the bookcase. The volume of Pliny the Elder that held my secret notes was exactly where it should be, but its spine was misaligned by a single centimeter from its neighbor, a mistake a scholar would never make. They were searching, and with growing desperation. Later that afternoon, the confrontation arrived on schedule. Marcus, pale and looking genuinely worried, or perhaps just annoyed, found me reading in the living room. Valerie was right behind him, holding a mahogany portfolio. "Elias, you're back? You should have called," Marcus said, his concern ringing hollow. "We had the estate planning meeting scheduled for today. I was under the impression it was an optional discussion, Marcus. The train strike was sudden. Apologies." I closed my book, meeting their eyes. Valerie slid the portfolio onto the coffee table with a practiced, gentle thump. Elias, she corrected smoothly, the slip-up momentary but jarring. "We need to talk. Your doctor, Dr. Sinclair, is concerned about your memory lapses. Just minor things, but Marcus and I have arranged for a temporary protective conservatorship. It's just a document that allows us to manage your finances and medical decisions until you are fully recovered. For your own safety." The document was titled in bold, cruel print, "Petition for Protective Conservatorship and Guardianship." It was a swift, legal attempt to erase my autonomy. I leaned back, feigning resignation. "My memory is fine, Valerie, but I appreciate the concern. Give me the pen." As I reached for the document, I deliberately, but clumsily, knocked over the stone bust of Hadrian that sat on a small end table. It wasn't the valuable one, just a cheap copy. It tumbled to the thick rug with a dull thud. Valerie let out a sharp, choked gasp, a sound far too intense for a falling piece of stone. Her eyes shot a panicked, lightning-fast signal to Marcus. Not one of annoyance at the noise, but one of pure, unadulterated fear. Marcus quickly knelt to pick it up, his hand shaking. "Careful, uncle," he muttered, his voice tight. "Don't break anything. It's just stone." I watched their faces, seeing the micro-expression of fear confirm everything. I signed the first page, just the preliminary document that wasn't the final petition, my hand steady. "I think I need a cup of tea before I look at the rest of this," I said, my voice calm. I knew the stone bust was empty, but why were they so terrified that I would break a worthless souvenir? Why the panic over a statue? And what did they really want me to sign? I retreated to the kitchen, making the tea a deliberate, drawn-out process. The bust of Hadrian, I now realized, had been their makeshift safe before their surveillance had ramped up. Perhaps a small key, or a slip of paper, had been kept inside its hollow base. When I'd moved it recently for dusting, I'd noted its unusual lightness. They thought I'd broken it open and found their secret. Their fear was my victory, a momentary lapse in their perfect performance. Back in the study, I began my counter-investigation. My expertise was not in modern forensics, but in ancient cryptology, which, at its heart, is the art of pattern recognition and deception. I treated my home like an archaeological site, looking for disturbances in the sediment. First, the bookshelves. I ran my fingers along the spines of my favorite texts, the ones they were least likely to touch. I found it tucked behind a row of oversized German art history books. A small, dark cylinder nestled perfectly in the space where a missing volume should have been. It was an antique lapel pin, a dark bronze fleur-de-lis, but upon closer inspection, it was too heavy and the pin mechanism was too modern. It was a listening device, disguised with elegant cruelty. I handled it with a linen handkerchief, placing it gently on the center of my desk. They were listening, which meant the threat was far beyond a mere will contest. They were tracking a valuable secret. That secret was the Codex Argentum, the manuscript I discovered in a sealed vault beneath a forgotten library. It contained a previously unknown account of Emperor Hadrian's final years, a discovery that would reshape history. More importantly, it was worth a fortune on the black market. I had kept the find secret for two reasons: to protect it from the political squabbles of the academic world and to verify its authenticity away from the pressure of public scrutiny. Marcus and Valerie must have found a document, a note, or an old draft related to the Codex. They believed it was hidden in the house. The pin's tiny indicator light was a dim, pulsing red. Low battery. I had a window. I used the quiet hours to secure my real documentation. I didn't trust my computer or my digital files. My true backup was analog. I retrieved a specific, battered copy of Gibbon's The Decline and Fall from the attic. Inside its spine, I had inserted a length of high-resolution microfilm, containing a complete scan of the Codex and, more critically, all the evidence I had compiled against Marcus and Valerie, their forged signatures, records of their suspicious contacts with a known international antiquities fence, and a detailed timeline of their intrusions into my life. I had dubbed the file the Silver Case. The key to the Codex translation, the true Hadrian cipher, was not in the microfilm. It was hidden in plain sight, a few lines of seemingly innocuous marginalia in the Pliny the Elder volume. If they stole the microfilm, they would only have untranslatable images and evidence of their own crimes. Just as I finished securing the microfilm reel in a new, unassailable hiding place, the false bottom of my antique inkwell, my computer chimed. It was an email, heavily encrypted, bypassing my security filters. The sender was listed as Archivist L. The body of the email was a short message composed entirely of the Hadrian cipher, the same complex symbols I had seen on the train napkin. The decoded message was chilling. That evening, I prepared the necessary documentation for my escape. I didn't trust modern electronics, so I employed analog espionage. I rigged a tiny, old-fashioned pinhole camera, cleverly concealed inside the lens cap of an antique stereo viewer, and placed it to record the entire study, focusing on my desk and the front door. This would capture their inevitable final search. I then crafted a dummy document, a brilliant forgery of the Codex, complete with my own fabricated translation. This fake translation included a damning line of text that suggested the Codex was not merely a historical document, but a deed to a vast, centuries-old trove of gold. It was a perfect, irresistible hook for people whose primary motivation was greed. I knew Marcus was working with a wealthy, shadowy figure, the antiquities fence, who would pay millions for what they thought was a treasure map. I laced the dummy with an invisible, non-toxic tracer dye, only visible under specific UV light, linking it to the international broker. The core of my strategy lay in the true nature of the Codex. The real value wasn't the manuscript's images or its physical makeup. It was the key to its translation, which I had hidden in the marginalia of the Pliny text. If they found the dummy, they would rush to their illicit contact, unaware they were carrying a trap. If they searched for the real translation key, they would only find my own damning evidence hidden in Gibbon's spine. Before retiring for the night, I sent a reply to Archivist L via the same encrypted channel. The message, brief and in the same cipher, read, "Safe. University tomorrow. Contact Professor Sharma." Professor Anya Sharma was my oldest and most trusted academic confidant, now the head of the university's cryptology department. If Lena/Archivist L was genuine, she would know to use Professor Sharma as an intermediary. The next morning, I announced my departure for the university's history department. "Just a few hours, Marcus. I'm volunteering to bring some order to their ancient archives. I believe I have stories worth telling," I said, repeating the phrase I had considered using for my eventual freedom. Marcus, trying to hide his impatience, gave a shallow, tight nod. I walked out, carrying a large, heavy briefcase containing old lecture notes, the fake codex, and the Gibbon volume with the microfilm. I was stepping out of the domestic trap and into the light of my professional world, where I still held the advantage of knowledge. The trap was set, but could I get the evidence to Professor Sharma before Marcus realized I had tricked him? The university's history department felt like an oasis of sanity. The air here was cool and dry, scented with ozone and the deep, clean smell of library varnish. It was a place where knowledge reigned, and I was in my element. I had arranged to meet Professor Sharma in the restricted access archive, a silent, subterranean cavern of priceless texts. I found Anya in the narrow aisle between the medieval manuscripts and the Roman scrolls, her face partially obscured by the lamp on her cart. Her sharp, intelligent eyes were grave. "Elias, what is going on? Your email was unsettling. And what is this about the Hadrian cipher? Only you and I have ever truly discussed it." I bypassed the pleasantries. "I need you to secure two things, Anya. The first is a sealed document at my safety deposit box. The second is this." I handed her the Gibbon volume, detailing the hidden microfilm in the spine. "It's the Codex Argentum and the evidence I've collected on Marcus. He's working with an international antiquities broker, using Valerie to get close to me. They want the Codex." Anya, a seasoned scholar, didn't panic. She simply nodded and slipped the book onto her cart, covering it with a sheaf of old papers. "An archivist, El? Is that your young friend? I suspect it is a student named Lena. She was on the train. She's working with you." I asked her to keep an eye on your public correspondence after a few suspicious inquiries came through the department. "She's gifted in cryptology. A true scholar. She contacted me yesterday after your encrypted reply. She's monitoring the safety deposit box now." Anya was already on the case, having received the initial warning. As we spoke, a shadow passed the end of the aisle. I glanced up. Marcus. He was dressed in a dark suit, ostensibly on a business call, but his eyes were scanning the rows of shelves with manic intensity. He had followed me. "Marcus is here. He followed me," I murmured, keeping my voice low. "He knows I'm making a move." "He's good," Anya replied, her eyes tracking him through the gaps in the shelving. "I'll take the Gibbon volume and the dummy notes and secure them in the high-security vault. You need to keep him occupied." I immediately did the last thing Marcus would expect. I walked straight toward him, offering a wide, theatrical smile. "Marcus, what a surprise. I thought you were back in the office." "I'm just here setting up my volunteer hours, digging through old lecture notes." The surprise on his face was genuine, quickly replaced by a veneer of practiced indifference. Uncle. Just running an errand nearby. Thought I'd see how your first day was going. You shouldn't strain yourself with this dusty old stuff." His eyes darted past me, searching for my briefcase, for anything I might have left unattended. "Nonsense, Marcus. I thrive on dust. I'm just sorting through these." I patted the heavy briefcase, which now contained only the dummy codex and the decoy notes. A lot of work here. The tension was suffocating. I kept talking, distracting him with mundane details about the department, until Anya, a master of subtle movement, had disappeared down the stairwell to the secure vault. When I finally returned home hours later, the charade of normalcy shattered. The front door was ajar, a clean, violent break in the wood frame. The moment I entered the study, I saw it. The old, cast-iron safe, usually containing only my children's school records and old tax returns, had been brutally pried open. The heavy steel door lay on the floor, twisted and ruined. Nothing valuable was taken, but the message was clear. They had escalated from subtle surveillance to outright violence. I looked at the broken safe, then at the antique stereo viewer with the hidden camera, which was still recording their desperate search. They've escalated to violence. Did Marcus find the dummy document, or does he know the truth? The next morning, the broken safe lay like a grotesque wound in the quiet order of my study. I hadn't reported the break-in. I was waiting for them. The stereo viewer's red recording light was still blinking, a silent witness. I had barely settled at my desk, pretending to read a newspaper, when Marcus and Valerie burst into the room. Their composure was gone, replaced by a desperate, frantic aggression. Valerie's face was blotchy, her sweetness entirely evaporated. Marcus was holding a sheaf of papers, the signed, but non-final, conservatorship document from Part 2. "The game is over, Elias," Marcus hissed, throwing the papers onto the desk. "Sign the final petition. Now, we know you took something from the university archives yesterday, and we found the codex, or at least, what you wanted us to find." He gestured to a corner of the room, where a discarded, fire-damaged old notebook lay. It was my dummy codex, burnt around the edges to suggest a desperate attempt to destroy evidence. "You're not going to like what happens when we tell the university and the police that you, a respected scholar, were hoarding a priceless antiquity while fabricating an international conspiracy to cover your tracks." Valerie spat, her eyes gleaming with malice. The conservatorship is just the start. You'll be disgraced. I remained calm, a professor lecturing two particularly dull students. You found the notes, Marcus? Tell me, what did the esteemed Codex Argentum say? The one about the gold trove? Did you contact your buyer, the man you meet with in Zurich, Mr. Petrov? Marcus froze. His jaw tightened. Valerie's eyes widened with genuine shock. I had confirmed his biggest secret. There is no gold trove, Marcus. And you didn't find the Codex Argentum. You found a decoy, I said, leaning back. The real Codex Argentum, which means silver case in Latin, is not a manuscript. It is the name I gave to the meticulously documented file of your crimes. I reached for the antique inkwell, pulled out the microfilm reel, and placed it on the desk. This holds your forged signatures, your contact logs with Mr. Petrov, and the full video evidence from the stereo viewer right here. I gestured to the antique device. The notes you found? They were treated with a tracer dye that will be visible to the authorities when they handle it, tying it directly to your broker, Petrov. You haven't found a treasure, you have found a trap. And you are caught. A beat of stunned, terrifying silence filled the room. Marcus, realizing the depth of the deception and the severity of his exposure, lunged across the desk, his hands reaching for my throat. Years of polite resentment exploding into pure, violent rage. You arrogant old fool. I deserve this house. I deserve that money, he roared. Just as his fingers brushed my collar, the doorbell rang. A loud, clear, authoritative chime that resonated through the house. I had timed it perfectly. Anya Sharma had used the evidence in the Gibbon volume to secure an immediate warrant. Marcus stopped, his body taut with defeat, his rage instantly replaced by a cold, unsettling smile. He straightened his tie. You win the battle, Elias, he hissed, his voice low and devoid of emotion. He nodded toward Valerie, who was backing away, her eyes now calculating. But you've forgotten one thing. He stepped away from the desk, his shadow falling across the broken safe. Valerie wasn't after your money or your research. She was after you. The arrival of the local authorities and an investigator from the Historical Society's Security Division shattered the tense silence. Marcus and Valerie were apprehended quickly. The evidence, the Gibbon volume, the microfilm, the footage from the stereo viewer, and the tracer-laced dummy document, presented by Professor Sharma. The silver case was open and shut. During the interviews that followed, the deeper betrayal that Marcus had hinted at was revealed. Valerie, it turned out, was not Marcus's fiancée by chance. She was a plant, a highly trained operative working for Petrov, the international antiquities broker. She had been tasked years ago with infiltrating my life, seducing Marcus, who was already drowning in debt, and using him to gain access to my professional research. She wasn't just after the Codex. She had been trying to position herself as my sole caretaker, marrying into the family to secure control over my legacy itself. I felt a weariness settle in my bones, a deeper fatigue than any intellectual pursuit could cause. The feeling was not of shock, but a grim satisfaction that my instincts had been correct. My knowledge, my decades spent studying the architecture of betrayal in ancient empires, had been my shield. Days later, the silence in the house was a different kind of silence. It was clean. I sat at my desk, the mahogany surface now clear of papers and dust. The authorities had taken the remaining evidence. Justice had arrived, not in a swift, dramatic strike, but through the slow, meticulous accumulation of documentation. I took the last remnants of the investigation, printouts of their encrypted messages, photographs of the broken safe, and the damaged dummy document. I placed all of it in a banker's box, securing the lid. I labeled it, Marcus and Valerie, the silver case, August 2025. Vindicated. I stored it in the closet, not to forget, but to archive the past where it belonged. The last piece of my puzzle was the student from the train, Lena, the one who had sent the warning. I learned that she was a doctoral candidate in Anya's department, specializing in overlooked Roman-era documents. She had not been working for the broker. She was the archivist L I had communicated with. Anya had sent her on the train to give me the coded warning, a method they knew only I would recognize and trust. Lena, the true scholar, understood that knowledge protects. I opened my laptop. I composed an email, not to a high school principal, but to the dean of the university. I am establishing a new annual scholarship in ancient cryptology to be known as the Hadrian Cipher Fellowship. The first recipient is to be Lena Volkov, a student whose quick thinking and intellectual integrity saved a priceless historical artifact and exposed an international crime ring. I will also be dedicating the next 2 years to working with her to complete the full translation of the true Codex Argentum. I have lessons worth sharing. Students should know that knowledge protects, documentation matters, and justice, though slow, arrives for those patient enough to pursue it properly. I hit send, closed the laptop, and looked around my study. Books I'd collected, papers I'd graded, a life I'd built. Everything intact despite their attempts to destroy it. I smiled slightly, the first genuine smile in months. Not because I was happy, happiness would take time, but because I was free. The past was archived where it belonged. Today, I was just a professor with lessons to share and a life of new discoveries to pursue. That was enough. That was everything. What new secrets, I wondered, awaited the retired professor of ancient mysteries?